Greetings, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Brexit and the Irish border. Well, Brexit is happening. That is the first thing to apprise yourself of. 2016, 52% of people in the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, and that's happening. The general election last year, Labour and the Conservatives and UKIP, they all said yes, they would implement a Brexit. Between them, those parties got 85% of the vote. Even the Liberal Democrats are not absolutely against, though sometimes saying, well, we'll have a second referendum. Now, the Republic of Ireland held referenda several times, many times, because under our constitution we must hold one every time a constitutional change is proposed. And we voted no to the Treaty of Lisbon. Then we were forced to vote again years later. There was a huge amount of EU propaganda, and we voted yes the second time. Likewise with Lisbon, we voted no to that treaty initially, and on the second attempt we voted yes to it. So that's obviously not respecting the will of the people. Now, I know the will of the people did change their mind. At least some of them did. I'm not totally opposed to a second referendum, so long as there's a decent interval, like say 20 years between them. Now, under the Treaty of Lisbon, EU states have the right to leave. That's explicit. Even prior to the Treaty of Lisbon, it was arguable that EU member states had a right to withdraw. But now that is beyond argument, and indeed, the United Kingdom has invoked this right. So some people point to the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, and it's true that it mentions that both the Republic of Ireland and the UK are members of the European Union. The agreement's not predicated on that. It doesn't require them to still remain in the EU for the agreement to still be valid. Another point is, under the Treaty of Lisbon, all EU member states gave each other permission to leave the EU, just in case there'd been any doubt about that beforehand. Now, there are going to be certain complications arising. The United Kingdom has a land border with only one other country, and that's the Irish Republic. The EU enshrined the four freedoms into many of its treaties. These are the freedom of movement for people, services, capital, and goods. So the border between the UK and the Irish Republic is very soft at the moment. People wouldn't even perceive themselves to be driving over a border. You might see a sign here or there, but you won't see a police officer. There'll be no customs post, anything like that, which is a huge change from 20 years ago, when there were British Army bases all around and people being stopped and their cars being searched by the police and things like that. And even on the southern side of the border, the guards were there, as in police. But now it's a very soft border. So a lot of people living on one side, working on the other, people doing business on both sides. Now, the border's only been there since 1921, but all through this century, people have been trading and going to school on one side and working on the other, things like that. It became more difficult in the Troubles from the 70s to the 90s. But even prior to the 70s, there were some border checks for taxation purposes, and it could be going back to that because certain goods are taxed at a higher or lower rate on either side, and if you're bringing a huge amount of whatever, easily saleable good like cigarettes to the other side, they might want to tax you. Think it's more than for personal use. Now, nationalists don't want that border to exist at all. They would like Northern Ireland to leave the UK, join the Republic of Ireland. Now, it's getting tricky leaving the EU because there's a possibility of the United Kingdom remaining in the single market, so having to follow all the EU's regulations. And therefore, some people say, well, that's not like leaving the EU at all, because in order to be in the single market, these rules apply not just to the UK trading into the European Union, but all economic activity within the UK would have to abide by EU regulation, so as not to give the UK an unfair advantage. If, for example, they had to be lower than a certain number of public holidays in the UK, that'd be cheaper for companies to employ people there that have a competitive advantage, which would be unfair to the other EU member states. Some variation between member states is allowed, but only so much, or if health and safety regulations were much laxer, that would give the UK a competitive advantage. So because of the single market, one has to abide by these things for economic activity, which are solely in the UK, not about trading into the EU. So it seems like the UK is not going to be a member of the single market, at least not fully. Anyway, the right to work. Now, even before we joined the European Union, people from the Republic of Ireland, we were given the right to work within the UK, to live, vote, work there. Uniquely amongst non-Commonwealth countries, we had that, and then even Commonwealth countries lost that, and only we had it. So we were very privileged. Will that continue? It seems like it will. even though other EU member states are going to lose that. So even UKIP supports this. So we're extraordinarily fortunate. Our friends and neighbours in the United Kingdom are treated us very favourably. Now, there are communities who span the border, and there are border communities against Brexit. There's a big campaign about that. They want a soft border, it to be completely porous. But this is going to be tricky. There are already issues long before we left the EU. The UK left the EU, was about to. Schengen agreement. The UK is not in the Schengen zone. The Republic of Ireland is. Somebody got a visa for one country are not allowed to go to the other. Tourist visa, business visa, whatever it is. And so there could be illegal immigration from the Republic of Ireland to the UK or the other way around. But there are not very many border checks, but it's going to become more of an issue as EU nationals are no longer going to have the automatic right to live and work in the UK, which they had or will have up until the UK leaves the European Union. So how can these spot checks be done? The British government and the Irish government are keen to avoid a hard border. It's difficult to see how this can be entirely avoided. People have said, well, let's treat the Irish Sea as the border. So there's going to be a border somewhere, it's just a question of where it is. And it goes against nationalism to have a proper border and checks. It goes against Irish nationalism, that's see. Well, I think people in the Republic of Ireland, we need to recognise that being in the European Union carries with it certain disadvantages. So we're going to have to either accept those disadvantages or leave the EU. We could leave the EU and seek readmission to the United Kingdom. Now, virtually nobody wants that. And even if we did vote for it and plead with it, the UK, I doubt the UK would allow us back in. Say, well, we'd have to subsidise you, and some ultra-nationalists on your side would start bombing us. No matter how absolutely clear-cut the democratic decision was, some extremists in the Republic of Ireland would not accept it. The Republic of Ireland represents less than 1% of the European Union's population, so the EU is probably not going to care about the Republic of Ireland that much. But if it does care about all those member states, it should really do everything for the Irish Republic, because we'll be impacted by Brexit more than any other member state. On the other hand, perhaps people are using this as a proxy anti-Brexit issue to put an obstacle in the path of Brexit and try and reverse it. And some British anti-Brexiteers are doing that, trying to create ructions like Sir John Major. Perhaps the EU doesn't care about us at all if they're not willing to be very helpful to the UK in making sure the Irish border is not problematic. Northern Ireland could, of course, choose to leave the UK and join the Republic of Ireland, and that would be that. And the UK government has said for a century, if the majority of Northern Ireland ever wants that, that'll happen. 1973, there was the border poll, and about 98% of the votes were for staying in the UK. Yes, nationalists boycotted it, but nevertheless, 59% of registered voters voted to stay in the UK. Now, some people would say that settles it for all time. But anyway, it's an open issue. It's to be revisited. I think both governments have accepted that. That might happen anyway. Brexit is a bit more likely. Nationalists in Northern Ireland often were not really nationalists. Were nationalists in name, would call themselves Irish, which they are, and they would carry Irish passports, fly the tricolour, but not actually want to join the Republic of Ireland. Now, it's true that Northern Ireland voted to stay in the EU, about 56% of people. But anyway, Northern Ireland is also in the UK and must follow the UK as a whole. Northern Ireland is only 3% of the UK population. It's curious to see John Major's position. He was dead against referenda on anything. Not on Scottish devolution, Welsh devolution, not on the euro, not on leaving the EU. But now there's had one, he definitely wants one again, because he can't accept that his side, despite their huge advantages, lost. Anyway, British political parties have always respected referendum results until now. They've always given effect to the will of the people. And I know they're not legally required to do so. It is not a plebiscite. Anyway, so what is going to happen? There are going to have to be some sort of border checks, regrettably. I don't see how it can be avoided because the regulations for goods and services will not be exactly the same in the UK and the Republic of Ireland. So how can we see that things which do not meet whatever standards are not being sold on the other side, or services are not being provided on the other side which don't meet the legal requirements? And that is that. It'd be good if there could be harmonisation to some degree. The UK is going to continue to trade with the EU. Now, if one's selling into China, one has to meet their regulations. If one's selling to the United States, one has to meet their regulations. The difference with the EU is they try to insist on controlling behind borders trade, and the UK trading even with other countries, say Japan or South Africa. And there's the rub. So will require a lot of goodwill, a lot of imagination to come up with some scheme whereby a hard border could be avoided. I would like to see a frictionless border. At the moment, I can't see how it's going to happen, unfortunately.